Just days after the final whistle blew on the biggest World Cup in history, FIFA finds itself fighting for its own leadership. Gianni Infantino, the man who has run world football since 2016, is facing something he's never dealt with before, a direct threat to his job. And it's not coming from some distant corner of the football world, it's coming from the very continent that helped put him in power in the first place. Reports out of Europe over the past 2 days suggest UEFA has delivered Infantino a blunt ultimatum: resign or face a vote designed to remove him from office entirely. This isn't some rumor floating around social media. It's coming from established football reporters, and it's directly tied to a commercial deal Infantino himself was forced to scrap just 1 day earlier. So how did FIFA go from celebrating a World Cup that just wrapped up to a full-blown leadership crisis in the space of a single week? And more importantly, what actually happens if Infantino refuses to walk away? So what's really happening here? Let's break it all down. To understand why UEFA is reportedly ready to push Infantino out, you have to rewind just a few days to when FIFA unveiled a plan called FIFA Forward Enterprise, shortened in most reporting to FFE. The idea was to create a new commercial entity that would take over the rights to FIFA's biggest competitions, including the World Cup itself. The twist was that FIFA planned to sell a minority stake in that entity to outside investors, opening up part of football's most valuable commercial property to private money for the first time in the sport's history. FIFA framed it as a way to generate more funding for member associations, especially smaller federations that depend heavily on development grants. But the reaction across Europe was almost immediate and almost entirely negative. Reports suggest the whole saga unfolded in less than a week. FIFA revealed the proposal early on, opposition built through the middle of the week, and by the weekend the entire plan was dead. For an organization that usually moves at a bureaucratic crawl, that's an incredibly fast collapse, and it tells you just how intense the internal pressure really was. UEFA, representing 55 national associations, along with confederations in Asia and North and Central America, pushed back hard. Reports suggest UEFA's member associations even discussed boycotting FIFA competitions altogether if the plan went ahead, a threat serious enough that it reportedly forced FIFA's hand. By the end of last week, Infantino had pulled the plug on the entire proposal, saying it had created divisions that no longer served football's original purpose. On paper, that should have ended the story. Instead, it seems to have only made things worse for him personally. The confederations that fought the plan didn't stop once it was withdrawn. They turned their attention to his leadership itself. Quick pause before we go further into how serious this actually is. If you're new here, this channel breaks down football's biggest stories as they happen. No fluff, just what's actually going on. Hitting subscribe now means you won't miss where this goes next. Here's where things get interesting. Even after Infantino scrapped the commercial plan, UEFA didn't back down. According to reports from British outlets, UEFA followed up almost immediately with a statement saying it had lost confidence in FIFA's current leadership entirely. That's a significant escalation. Killing a business proposal is one thing. Publicly declaring you no longer trust the person running the organization is something else altogether. Multiple reports now suggest UEFA went further behind the scenes, informing Infantino directly that he should resign or face a formal vote of no confidence. And this isn't an empty threat. Under FIFA's own statutes, a fifth of its member associations, which works out to 43 out of 211, can force FIFA to call an extraordinary Congress. UEFA alone has 55 member federations, well past that threshold on its own. Some reports even suggest every single one of UEFA's 55 associations, including smaller nations that rarely make headlines, is prepared to back Infantino's removal if he doesn't step down voluntarily. That's not a fringe rebellion. That's an entire continent lined up against the man at the top of world football's governing body. But that's only part of the story. UEFA wasn't the only confederation to voice frustration. Reports indicate CONCACAF, the governing body for North and Central American football, issued its own statement accusing FIFA's leadership of poor governance. The Asian Confederation also welcomed the plan's withdrawal, while calling for far more transparent decision-making going forward. Even inside FIFA's own walls, there was dissent. One of Infantino's senior advisors reportedly resigned over the proposal, saying publicly he opposed it completely. When people inside your own inner circle start walking away, that's usually a sign the crisis runs deeper than one bad business idea. All right, this is a good spot to remind you, if you want to see exactly how this vote process could actually unfold, stick around and subscribe. We're going deep on FIFA's governance rules next, and it's more interesting than you'd expect. This matters because FIFA's been through crises before, just never quite like this. Football's governing body has weathered plenty of scandals over the years, from corruption investigations that toppled previous leadership to disputes over how past World Cup hosting rights were awarded. But those crises tended to come from outside pressure: law enforcement, journalists, government investigations. What's happening now is different. This is FIFA's own member associations, the very people who vote Infantino into office every few years, turning against him from the inside. The bigger issue here isn't really about one canceled business deal anymore. It's about trust. Reports suggest UEFA's complaint centers heavily on transparency, or the lack of it. When Infantino first ran for FIFA president back in 2016, he promised a cleaner, more open organization after the scandals that brought down his predecessor. According to UEFA's own public statement, the way this commercial proposal was handled, described as a rushed, closed-door process, felt like a direct contradiction of that promise. It's worth remembering that FIFA has actually faced a leadership collapse before. Back in 2015, corruption investigations spanning multiple countries eventually forced out the man who ran the organization before Infantino, triggering the election that first brought Infantino to power in 2016. That crisis came from criminal investigations and law enforcement raids. This one is coming entirely from within football's own house, which in some ways makes it a very different kind of threat to navigate. What makes this moment different from FIFA's past controversies is the timing. This is happening immediately after what should have been Infantino's crowning achievement, successfully hosting and delivering a World Cup across 3 countries. Instead of basking in the tournament's success, FIFA's leadership is now consumed by a governance fight that could shape the run-up to the next presidential election, reportedly scheduled for March of next year. There is also the mechanics of the process itself worth understanding. Triggering an extraordinary Congress isn't instant. Once enough member associations formally request it, FIFA's reportedly required to hold that Congress within roughly 3 months. That means even if UEFA does pull the trigger, this wouldn't be resolved overnight. It would likely turn into a drawn-out battle for votes across all 211 member federations, with confederations in Africa, South America, and Oceania potentially becoming the deciding voices in whether Infantino survives. So how does any of this actually affect the people who care most about football, the players and the fans? Directly, not much changes overnight. Training continues, transfer windows carry on, domestic seasons kick off as normal. But indirectly, a leadership crisis at the top of FIFA creates real uncertainty for the sport's biggest decisions, from how future tournaments get funded to how revenue gets shared with the federations developing the next generation of players. Think about it from the perspective of a smaller football nation. Development funding, coaching programs, youth academies, a lot of that depends on FIFA's financial decisions and priorities. If the organization spends the next several months locked in an internal power struggle instead of football development, that uncertainty trickles all the way down to grassroots programs. For fans, there's something less tangible at stake too: confidence in the institution running the sport they love. Coming off a World Cup that delivered incredible moments on the pitch, it's a strange contrast watching the same organization now dealing with public accusations of secrecy from its own governing bodies. There's also the atmosphere around the game to consider. Major tournaments only work because national federations, broadcasters, sponsors, and fans all trust that FIFA is being run fairly and transparently. Every headline about internal power struggles chips away at that trust just a little more, even if most fans in the stands never think about FIFA's boardroom politics on match day. Would this affect your excitement for football's future tournaments, knowing the organization behind them is dealing with this kind of internal turmoil? It's genuinely worth thinking about. If you're enjoying this kind of breakdown, this is exactly the type of story we cover here regularly. Subscribing costs nothing, and it means you'll catch every update on this the moment it happens. So what happens from here? There are a few realistic paths this could take. Best case for Infantino, the pressure eases. He spends the coming weeks meeting directly with confederations, rebuilding trust, and UEFA quietly steps back from pushing a formal vote, treating this as a warning shot rather than the opening move of an actual removal campaign. FIFA presidents have absorbed criticism before and survived it. Worst realistic case, UEFA follows through. Enough member associations sign on to the request. FIFA gets forced to schedule that extraordinary Congress, and the sport heads into a genuinely contested vote on its own leadership. Even if Infantino ultimately survives a vote like that, simply having to fight publicly for his job would be a real blow to his authority heading into next year's presidential election. There's also a middle path worth considering. UEFA's threat may be less about actually removing Infantino right now and more about leverage, making sure nothing like the Forward Enterprise proposal gets revived without real consultation next time. Pressure campaigns like this don't always end in an actual vote. Sometimes the threat alone is enough to change how an organization operates going forward. What FIFA does next will likely depend on how the other confederations respond in the coming days. If associations in South America, Africa, and Oceania start echoing UEFA's language, this escalates quickly. If they stay quiet or voice support for Infantino instead, the crisis could cool down just as fast as it heated up. And there's one more layer to watch closely. Infantino is reportedly planning to seek another term as FIFA president at elections scheduled for next March. Even if this specific standoff with UEFA fades without a formal vote, it's now very likely to become a central talking point in that campaign, giving rival candidates and unhappy federations a clear opening to challenge him at the ballot box instead of through an emergency Congress. So to sum it all up, FIFA just scrapped a controversial plan to sell part of the World Cup's commercial rights after fierce backlash from UEFA and other confederations. Instead of putting the crisis to rest, that decision seems to have exposed something deeper, a serious breakdown in trust between Infantino and some of football's most powerful governing bodies. Now, reports suggest UEFA is prepared to demand his resignation, backed by enough member associations to force a formal vote if he refuses to go quietly. The story is still developing, and the numbers involved, 55 associations in Europe alone, well past the threshold needed to trigger action, make it hard to dismiss as empty noise.